In the UK, our neighbours often live too close to home.
Come and speak to me. You're doing it.
So it's no surprise 1 in 5 of us have been in an argument with next door. Coming up, a community is divided and comes to blows.
There's a torrent of abuse and foul language.
Makes me feel sick looking at it.
A woman intimidated by her next-door neighbours.
I thought, oh my God, what has moved in?
And there's no love lost between residents on one London street.
I wanted him to either drop dead or leave.
Ramsbottom, an historic mill town on the Pennine Moors in Lancashire. Between 2000 and 2008, one of its streets was home to a family and their menagerie of pets, all of whom had moved up from the south of England.
The house was lovely, just what we wanted. And the garden, you could put a football pitch in it.
The Chawners comprised Dad Philip.
I've got sticky hands now.
Mum Audrey.
Right, that's enough now.
24-year-old Emma.
You're only meant to have a couple of pieces, not the whole thing.
Oh, shut up.
26-year-old Sam.
Sammy!
Sandwich.
Oh, the carpet sucks!
Terrier Jenny.
She's disappeared in between her boobs, that's just wrong.
And a cockatiel called Billy.
Ow! It bit me! Get him. Move it.
Us as a family, we're just caring. We're a close, very close family.
Friendly, that's it. That's what we are, friendly.
At first, the new family were barely noticed by locals, including Stuart Johnson, the ex-chair of the Residents' Committee, and the only one of their neighbours willing to be on camera.
The first impressions of the Chawners basically was pretty quiet. They seemed to spend most of the time in the house. You would only see them getting in the car, going out shopping.
But it wasn't long before the neighbours began to see a different side to the new arrivals.
There wasn't a load of aggravation from day one. It was just incidents started building up over a period of time, and then you started putting 2 and 2 together.
Mr. Stuart Johnson was the most ignorant so-and-so I'd ever known. As I know, he was the main person to complain.
All right, that's fine, yeah, thank you.
A few weeks after moving in, the arrival of the family's loudest member, their beloved Pooch, was to mark a turning point in community relations.
And once we got Jenny, our neighbour complained about her barking 24 hours a day, which was never true.
Do you know, when that window being open, that made the dog worse.
And for the neighbours, who chose not to be identified, it was hell.
This dog was a nightmare. It could often be the first thing I would hear in the morning and the last thing at night. It was relentless.
Get out the window!
But clearly the Chawners had different priorities than worrying about their neighbours.
Our pets are more important than our neighbours. Our pets are like a family to us.
Equally, the neighbours' pets were proving a problem for the Chawners.
Gaskin!
Oh, I must have stepped in it.
If you don't clean it off, you don't get your dinner. That means people don't pick up their own shit.
Where's the wet wipes?
That's disgusting.
And you know, one morning I got up, the milk was on the doorstep, and there's a dog up the road, and someone let the dog pee all over the milk.
But according to their neighbours, the main culprits fouling the area were the Chawners' own pets.
The dog poo, that's a load of rubbish, because when our dog does his business, we pick it up and we put it in the bin. That's where it belongs.
I saw on numerous occasions the Chawners leading their dog in front of neighbours' houses just so it could defecate.
The bit down here is down here.
Ew. I never once saw the Chawners pick up their dog's mess.
Oh, God. I'll do that.
This is Jenny's poo. Jenny's a small dog. Jenny's poos are really small, yeah? And every time we used to go out on Ramsbottom, we used to get big shit on the floor. Jenny does a turd about that small.
It wasn't just the Chorners' pets their neighbours had an issue with. It was also their favourite pastime.
What am I thinking EastEnders, don't ask?
I'm going to watch Supermarket Sweep, Dean and No Deal, fall in the bed, and then Come Dine With Me, and that'll swing right round then till 6 o'clock for the news. Yes, television is my most important thing in life, because there's not much else I can do now. Seeing a cruise on, oh yeah. Is my
Yours
light
is still lit up. No, yours is still lit up.
The TV would be so loud that, you know, the neighbouring houses could all hear the TV.
Some people had to endure it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Fed up with the racket from the Chorners' TV apparently blaring out constantly, the residents logged their complaints with the council. But one night, their next-door neighbour had had enough.
We watched all the programmes and then we went to bed, and then about 1 o'clock-ish we had a knock on the door.
I answered the door, and the neighbour was on the doorstep telling me, giving me abuse and telling me to turn the TV down.
There's a torrent of abuse and foul language, and they just didn't want to know.
Well, I don't know how she made out we had the television loud that day, because it wasn't our television. That was just her imagination.
I think that things escalated after that because they thought they were being picked on, and the incidents got worse and worse.
Coming up, a Lancashire woman gets the shock of her life.
Oh my God, what has moved in?
And it's nasty between neighbours on one London street.
I even bought some long nails I put around his vehicles so he had a puncture.
Back in 1991, Carol Gatenby and her family moved to a small town in Lancashire in search of a peaceful community.
When we moved here because it was quiet, and it remained quiet. Absolutely lovely place to live.
For the next 2 decades, life on the street was good for the Gatenbys.
Neighbours keep themselves to themselves. We help each other if need be. But yeah, lovely place.
But in 2012, 5 new residents moved into the house next door, and from the very start, alarm bells began to ring.
First couple of nights, it was just like banging, shouting, which was accepted because we thought somebody were moving in. But that noise became absolutely hell.
Soon after arriving, the new neighbour decided to introduce herself. But this first meeting would set the tone for the next year of Carol's life.
I opened the door after this banging, and I mean it was banging, it was braying on the door. And I looked and I saw this bedraggled woman there, dirty clothes on, and she just looked at me and said, "Do you know that woman next door at the other side of me? She's reported me to social services." And I thought, God, who is this woman? I've never even met her before. What is she doing? And I said, well, no, I don't really know the neighbour. And with that, she turned round, walked out of the gate, walked back round into her garden and slammed the door. And I thought, oh my God, what has moved in?
But it wasn't just face-to-face confrontation that would be coming Carol's way.
It was the next day when the door slamming started. She'd come in, she'd slam the door, she'd start effing and bawling. As soon as she got in, you could follow her all the way up here. If she was in a bad mood, she'd get all the safety gates, slam, 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 and that would go 9, 10 times.
Suffering the banging and shouting for the next few days, Carol finally decided that she would have to speak to her neighbour.
I stood here, she was stood at her door, and I said to her, "Can you stop banging? You've knocked the light fitting down." She looked at me, she goes, "Kids, what do you expect?" And she slammed the door, and as she did so, she shouted, "off."
With her polite requests falling on deaf ears, Carol endured the racket for the next few hours. But when she returned to the house to complain again, she was shocked by what she saw.
I went back round later and brayed on the door because the noise was just got to a state where it was unbearable. She opened the door and there was all banging on the walls. The children and her were banging on the walls. And I just thought, well, This is not right. It's not right.
Carol was already finding her new neighbours intimidating, but at this stage, she had no idea how bad it was actually going to get. For many families, owning the perfect home can be a pipe dream. But in South London, that dream came true for 68-year-old psychotherapist Annie Reed Henderson.
This is my street. This is my house where I raised my 2 children. I found the house for my husband and I, and when I first saw it from outside, I fell in love with it. I just knew I had to have it.
Over the years, Annie gave her home a complete makeover.
After my divorce, I renovated the whole house. This is my kitchen. Everything's been redone, but my real pride and joy is my garden. I did things like I put nice doors in. I added me into the house. This painting I love, but it was the beginning of me changing. As you can see, I no longer have black hair. This is my spiritual sanctuary, and I find it absolutely wonderful when it's quiet.
The peace and quiet was doubly important to Annie, as her home was also her place of work.
I've been a psychotherapist for 24 years. This is my therapy room. This is where I see all my patients. They've been referred to me because I am a spiritual person and I have peace and serenity, and that's what I feel in this room myself.
But in 2002, that would all change when a new neighbour bought the property next door.
The first time I met him, he was very charming, and he told me it was going to be his dream home for his wife and his family, and that he would be developing it. I thought, well, this is fine, you know, 18 months, 2 years maximum. Initially, there was noise, there was movement, but actually I embraced it as, you know, this is what people do when they develop their homes.
Annie's home was no longer a spiritual sanctuary, as the extent of the building works escalated over the months.
Can you hear that noise? There's been drilling this morning, and they'll be drilling any second again. There we are. More drilling. The noises I would hear next door vary from huge noise to just an irritating sort of fiddling around next door.
And it didn't stop there.
One day I had to sit in my car to make a phone call because I couldn't speak in the house.
It began to affect her livelihood as clients were driven away by the noise.
The most important thing for all of them, whether they're old or new patients, that it's quiet.
And is it quiet right now?
No.
And it wasn't just the noise that was proving to be a nightmare. One evening, Annie discovered the builders had dug a huge hole in her next-door neighbour's garden to test foundations.
All the mess came all over here, and it was appalling. It was so appalling that I felt like screaming.
It was all legitimate, but it was affecting Annie's beloved garden.
The fence was quite low, and I looked over, and I realised his garden had been dug down so far that my plants were going to die.
Her flower beds bordering the property next door were ruined.
It really distressed me because I'd spent 30 years working in this garden. I called over the fence and I said, "Can you tell me what that is?" And I was told, "Mind your own business." That consolidated, this was going to be a difficult neighbour.
But as her neighbour wasn't living there, all Annie felt she could do was shout over the fence to the builders. So at her own expense, she decided to get professional advice.
He didn't answer letters from solicitors, he didn't answer anything from my surveyor, and neither did his surveyor.
A year into the building's works, with no one still living at the property, a temporary structure suddenly appeared next door, much to Annie's alarm.
I looked out in the middle of the area, the garden area, and the contractors were here, and I asked them what it was, and I was told it was a kitchen and a loo for them. And that's when I thought, oh my God. To me it meant this is not a couple of years. I believe he's deluded. I believe he thinks he's building a mansion. I sometimes watch him come round and stand and stare at it. He's just a megalomaniac as far as I'm concerned.
Just when she thought her hell would never end, 2 years into the works, her neighbour's builders vanished overnight.
The building looked like nobody lived there. It was used as somewhere to store his stuff.
Now Annie faced a new dilemma, living next to an unoccupied, half-completed shell of a house. But soon after, not only were the builders to return, but her nightmare would get much worse.
When I saw the plans for the basement, it stated that it was going to be a laundry. And when I spoke to one of the contractors, he said, oh no, darling, it's a cinema.
In a once peaceful community in Ramsbottom, Lancashire, the constant noise from the Chawner family's pets and TV had caused relations with their closest neighbours to disintegrate.
There's a torrent of abuse and foul language, and they just didn't want to know.
Some people had to endure it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Dad, the lead's down there, by the curtain.
Brothers.
It bit me. Get him. Move it.
But it wasn't just the Chawners' pets and viewing habits.
Oh, forget the big old...
It was the family's never-ending battles with each other that were also causing problems.
I'll just give her a spoon.
We used to hear them screaming at each other on numerous occasions.
What do you want?
Oh, shut up.
By 2007, there'd been over 500 complaints of noise and antisocial behaviour against the Chawners. But the family felt the neighbours were against them for another reason.
In Ramsbottom, we were victimised.
We're being called fat bastards, Teletubbies.
Fatties, we've been called who eats all the pies.
They made out that they were being picked on because of the size.
What we do in our own house and how we lead our own lives is our own. Absolutely gorgeous.
Over the coming months, the more the Chawners saw themselves as victims, the more they clashed with neighbours out on the street.
Not only are these people nasty to each other, but they're also nasty to other people.
Your children coming home from school and being pestered by the two girls.
No, never. We've never, picked on anyone. We've never done nothing. Kept ourselves to ourselves, yeah.
Their neighbours disagreed.
We got screamed at. They used to throw things like bricks out of windows. The police were called on multiple occasions regarding the screaming.
We don't open our windows and throw bricks. That's just a load of lies.
They're nothing like what people say they are. They do help people out. But this particular neighbour next door, she did not like us. I just don't know, she did not like us.
As the weeks went by, the neighbours complained more and more to the council and the police, but the complaints did nothing to resolve the trouble, which now spread out onto the streets of Ramsbottom.
Once I was walking home on my own when the Chawner's father drove alongside me. He swerved the car towards me, onto the pavement and trapped me. He lowered his window and swore abuse at me. I was absolutely terrified and broke down in tears after he drove away.
I know what girl you're on about. That's more allegations. That's news to me. She got away with it as well. The lies.
It just doesn't happen in normal life. Suddenly, it had gone from being a nice, quiet street, and there was all this going on for, month after month, year after year, as it was.
They did everything they could to scare you and make you feel frightened. The less people on the street, at the time, the worse the abuse would be. It was terrifying.
The dispute between neighbours was about to escalate and become physical.
Well, we was walking our friend's dogs down the street, our older house, and we had this gang come towards us. About four pushed me away.
They grabbed hold of you, yeah.
They pinged me back. So,
they started asking what my mum and dad's names are.
Yeah.
They started calling our dog.
I was across in my front room and I heard a bit of kerfuffle outside. I looked across and the two Chowner girls were stood here, right in front of the wall. As I walked round to the front door to come across and see what the trouble was, I heard a scream.
She just punched me in the face and I just got really angry.
I'm not saying it's right to retaliate, but there's only so much abuse anybody can take before they reach their breaking point.
The two Chowner girls were running up the road and the other girl was running down the road.
Don't know if I was effing and swearing, but probably was.
She was fuming.
And I remember we burst through the door and I shouted at my dad.
And when I answered the door, she was actually standing there with her hand over her eye and crying her eyes out.
As I was walking up the street, Mr. Chowner had run down the street, straight up the path of the neighbour. He was hammering on the door. I thought he was going to knock the door down. I told the resident of the house to shut the door immediately. If I wanted him to hit anybody, I wanted him to hit me and not the resident.
Busybody Stewart, who was on the committee for the council, actually come over and he actually said that Emma caused all the trouble and he stood right close to me like he was going to punch me.
And he put his fist up to hit me. I personally would have rather him have hit me because we might have got him off the estate a bit quicker.
It makes me feel sick looking at it because I had to go through this and still get evicted from the house.
People are scared to live in that street. Sometimes scared to go out of the house. People looking, is there anybody about? Are they walking up and down? You shouldn't be having to do that. You should be able to walk freely.
Coming up, the Chawners go on the attack, but the neighbours fight back.
We're spying on people, we're getting evidence.
And Carol Gatenby's surveillance stakeout gets desperate.
I placed it against the wall all the time thinking, please, please, please pick something up, anything.
In South London, Annie Reed Henderson's once quiet and peaceful life had been invaded by a construction site next door.
It was always very intermittent, so you never thought, gosh, at least, you know, in 2 months' time, 3 months' time, something will have happened, because it didn't.
In 2005, 3 years after her nightmare began, scaffolding went up next door and huge tarpaulins were draped over her neighbour's house.
When it rained, because the gutter was broken, it would rip on the plastic. Couldn't sleep properly. I actually used earplugs because it was so bad. You could see through to the front of the house. The dirt that came in was unbelievable. Constant dirt. Might sound a bit mad, but I put it on my scales and discovered it weighed 4 pounds. I probably am a little obsessed, but it just sort of merged into sort of a nightmare. I wanted him to either drop dead or leave.
By 2006, Annie was in total despair over the building work next door. And to make matters worse, she discovered her neighbour had just been granted additional planning permission to expand the basement.
It shows the existing basement, which we all have, and it then progressed to that size, up to something very different. As you can see, it's vast, absolutely vast. When I saw the plans for the basement, it stated that it was going to be a laundry area. And when I spoke to one of the contractors, he said, "Oh no, darling, it's a cinema."
The plans were now far beyond a simple refurbishment. After more than 5 years of noise from the building site, one thing remains strangely silent. Her neighbour.
How do you get a resolution when somebody will not talk to you, won't respond to your lawyer's letters or your surveyor's letters?
Despite complaining to her local authority a number of times over the years, Annie claims that they have been little help.
I was constantly told by them when I made a complaint that they had no powers. They couldn't tell him when to finish. I went to the council meeting to hear what they were going to say, you know, as they review everything. Couldn't believe it. Everything was nodded through.
Finally, after 8 years and endless building work, the scaffolding next door came down. But Annie can't stand what remains.
That building there, I've named the bunker. It was attempted 4 times to get to where it is now. And frankly, it's hideous.
More than a decade of disturbances and living next door to a building site has also affected Annie financially.
I haven't earned any money for 3 years, which I think is criminal, personally.
Legal fees, repairing the garden and loss of earnings have left Annie financially strapped.
The costs so far are roughly about 35,000. Might well be more. The man has no consideration for a human being living next door because he doesn't give a shit.
With her endless complaints seemingly falling on deaf ears, it's made Crusader Annie consider taking matters into her own hands.
It made me want to be violent, not physically, but emotionally. I wanted to hurt him. I even bought some long nails that I put around his vehicles so he had a puncture. I didn't do it because I thought, no, that's not very spiritual, it's not very humanistic and whatever. I wish I'd done it now.
Although the building work appears to be nearing completion, Annie's not convinced her nightmare will ever end.
I get angry that, you know, 12 years on, it isn't finished, and it looks revolting. There's going to be no end. It's going to be like this for the rest of my life.
Oh, shut up.
Up in Lancashire, the antisocial noise and behaviour from the Chawner family led to their neighbours making over 500 complaints to the council.
Not only are these people nasty to each other, but they're also nasty to other people.
Fed up with their neighbours' complaints and feeling victimised, the Chawners came up with a plan to prove they weren't the only troublemakers.
When I came round in the car one day and there was a video camera hanging out of the window up there.
I got up one morning and fat was written into the car, and also we had scratches into the car also, which was done, I don't know, with a key or a penknife.
But the more the Chawners filmed, the more the neighbours fought back, sometimes in unusual ways.
There were complaints from the Chawners that gnomes had been taken out of people's gardens and placed into theirs.
This is where they come down and put the garden gnomes on the wall. Well, I think they done it because garden gnomes are on the plump side and we're on the plump side, so I think that's why they done it.
But it soon became clear it was more like filming a soap opera than an episode of Crime Watch.
You get a kick out of videoing young girls, yeah?
Do you get a kick out of scratching our car?
Who, me?
Nowhere.
Me? You think I want to go near your car? What's the point?
Because you do.
You've got better things to do. She's not as pathetic as other people.
We're spying on people, we're getting evidence.
You've got a problem with people around here.
Yeah, we like calling people, don't you?
I haven't called you nothing. I don't even know who you are.
You just said, are you related to the guinea pigs?
Right?
You could just be standing in the street with a group of people and they would suddenly be at their window with a camera in their hand for no reason.
I don't want to use the word hate because I don't hate people, but I think they were so disliked, it got that they were hated by people.
Loathed by their neighbours, it nevertheless took 7 years for the authorities to finally bring the Chawners to court.
Well, we went to court and we had to admit to these allegations.
The 12 accusations against the family included violence, harassment, damaging neighbours' property, throwing things out of windows, and noisy DIY at unreasonable times of day.
One Christmas, they said that we was banging the wall.
The Chawners came up with a bizarre defence for the banging. A story involving one of their favourite treats, a chocolate orange.
I just told him in court that all we did was just bang the orange on the wall. Just to crack it, that's all we did. And that's the only way that I've ever known how to do it.
To say that it was opening and eating chocolate oranges, well, it beggars belief, doesn't it?
The Chawners claim their solicitor advised them to plead guilty or face immediate eviction. They were allowed to stay in their home on condition they kept the peace for the next 12 months.
Dad, the lead's down there, by the curtain.
We knew that it would only be a short time because we knew they couldn't control themselves for 12 months.
The neighbours predicted when they knew themselves.
Look where we first met.
After the first court case, we stick together. We tried getting through it as a family. And my sister said to my dad and my mum, she said, "Oh, I'd like to go for the X Factor."
At the time of the X Factor, there was a lot of karaoke singing. She was obviously doing a lot of practicing. The singing, again, went on till the early hours. I don't think that she ever grasped that she couldn't sing.
Simon Cowell seemed to think as little of Emma's singing as the neighbours. The budding pop star's auditions turning her into an infamous flop star.
Maybe we were singing a few times there and again. Happy birthday and all that. I was singing. Can't stop that, can you?
Following Emma's X Factor disaster, over the next year the council received a further 134 complaints about noise. And by September 2008, the family were back in court. They were served with an eviction notice.
If they'd behaved themselves from the first court case, then they would still be living on the street.
We put some stuff in our car, like our clothes and some quilts and cushions, my pets, and we lived in the car for 7 weeks.
I'm glad they no longer live here, as they made our life an absolute misery.
I wouldn't like to see anybody in that situation, but for all the pain that they've caused people, I cannot feel sorry for them, really.
Let's get Ruby in.
They might have been evicted from their Ramsbottom home, but the Chawners would soon have a new roof over their heads and new neighbours. In Lancashire, Carol Gatenby and her family had endured months of noise and intimidation when new neighbours moved in next door.
The noise was just got to a state where it was unbearable. The children and her were banging on the walls.
Little did Carol know, in days that followed, it would be more than just banging and shouting coming from next door.
I was washing up in the kitchen, and all of a sudden I had this boom, boom, boom. I walked through here, and I thought it was my son, and I shouted out, "Will you turn that noise down?" And he said, "It's not me, it's them next door." By this time, I'd heard it through here. I come in here, the floor, it was vibrating. It was vibrating. You could feel it under your feet vibrating, the boom, boom, boom of the bass.
Unable to believe what was happening, Carol contacted the police for help and was told to keep a record of the goings-on.
I think I started logging about 3 weeks after she'd moved in. Police were saying, if you want to get her out and we need a court case, you've got to write everything down. Any evidence that you can get that will stick in court, that's what you need. 6:30, mayhem, banging, running up and down the stairs, swearing, shouting. She shouts, "Stop around now and do as you're well told." We thought it'd be an occasional log. It turned out to be, we were sat practically every night, all night, writing down. The screaming and shouting goes on and on, with external and internal doors being slammed continuously. Once again shouting about neighbours.
And at times the shouting, which often went on into the night, was so bad that Carol had to call the police out.
When it got really bad, police, they'd be here at least twice a week, every week. Sometimes it was every night, sometimes it was 2-3 times a night.
By now, 2 months of constant noise aggravation was taking a huge toll on Carol's husband and son too.
It was affecting us really bad because the sleep deprivation was terrible. I mean, I worked, my husband worked. We was managing on, some nights we were managing on 2 to 4 hours sleep. From the time that she moved in, we didn't want to live here anymore. We got out as much as possible. We went walking, we went to visiting family. We had to lay in bed listening to her screaming and shouting and just hoping it was going to stop so we could get some sleep. It was like living in a war zone but not actually having the war in your own home. And not knowing you couldn't do anything about it, just report it.
It got so bad, Carol had even started to consider moving. And in the days that followed, the disturbances got more menacing and more bizarre. Coming up, Carol's neighbour turns up the intimidation.
I'd sit down in here just for a bit of peace, but then it'd start on that wall.
And the Chawners make enemies with their new neighbours.
She got a junction against us. It's all lies yet again.
Up in Lancashire, the annoying noise from the newcomers next door to Carol Gatenby had her pursuing an eviction.
We had to lay in bed listening to her screaming and shouting and just hoping it was going to stop so we could get some sleep.
But as the days went on, it seemed as though Carol's neighbour was now taking drastic measures to intimidate her.
When we stopped complaining and just wrote it down, which we were told to do, it seemed as though she had to up her ante and she'd do anything she could to annoy us. Not only did we think she was using one of these, we also thought she was using one of these.
Despite telling the police she thought she could hear drilling and hammering next door, without evidence they couldn't act, and Carol could do nothing but listen in horror.
On a daily basis, the noise was so bad. There'd be banging, the drilling, the tap, 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 and it got so bad that we'd have to move from room to room.
Terrifyingly for the Gatenbys, the noises seemed to follow them around the house.
I'd sit down in here just for a bit of peace, but then, once they knew that I wasn't in the room, I was in here, it'd start on that wall.
Wherever Carol went, there was no escaping the torment.
The abuse that came through the wall, we know where you are, you bastard, we know where you are, you bitch. So I'd have to go from here, I'd go upstairs, I'd close the door, I'd sit on the bed, and within 5 minutes, there was on that wall. There was nowhere in the house you could go. It was like our own prison. Our own home was a prison.
Unable to escape the ordeal from next door, after 4 months in, Carol had recorded more than 40 pages of logs documenting her nightmare, which she sent off to the council.
I needed to get as much information as possible because I always had that thought that nobody believed us. Because I wouldn't have, like I said, I wouldn't have believed me.
And to ensure she was believed by the authorities, Carol came up with a plan to gather indisputable evidence.
On one particular day, I was talking to a friend on my phone and she said, "What is all that shouting and swearing? Who is that? It's horrendous." I said, "It's not in my house, it's next door. This is what we've got to put up with." So we finished the conversation and I thought, maybe if she could hear everything that was said next door on my phone while I was talking to her, maybe my phone could pick that up and here, presto, we'd get a result. So what I did, I put the phone on record, I placed it against the wall all the time thinking, please, 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 pick something up, anything. I left it and I left the room.
Fortunately for Carol, her ingenuity paid off, and she proceeded to record every incident she could on her phone before sending them all off to the police.
I felt relieved that at last there were proof that we weren't lying.
After 4 months, she finally had enough evidence to bring about a case against her neighbour.
Other people knew when they listened to that tape what was going on next door.
In May 2013, her neighbour was finally hauled before a court, where she was given an ASBO, banning her from banging, shouting and upsetting neighbours.
And it's only, to be quite honest, what she deserves, because she made our lives hell the time she was here.
10 months after the nightmare began, Carol's neighbour and her 4 children were evicted. And when the police came to inspect the property, Carol, curious to see just what she'd been living next door to, went in with them.
And as the policewoman opened the door, lo and behold, what was there? Full view, a drill and a hammer. I was so happy that those were there, because that was what I'd put down in my diaries, and no one believed me that that's what was happening.
Her neighbours might have gone, but with Carol and her family so used to the noise, it would be a long while before they could enjoy the peace and quiet of their community again.
But honestly, it was amazing. And for about a week afterwards, it was strange, not hearing them kids' voices.
What's the awkward?
I'll give you the pickle, you stick it in.
In Lancashire, the Chawner family had been evicted from their home after over 500 complaints from neighbours about their antisocial behaviour. Now, after 2 months living in their car, they found themselves a new 2-bedroomed house.
This is my sister's room. As you can see, this is how she gets out of the bed, all this way. And there's a lot of damp up there. This is our room. That's my mum and dad's bed. And that's my bed there. Living in a small space is horrible, especially sleeping in the same room as my mum and dad. It's not nice.
But it seems old habits die hard.
Hello.
Only weeks after moving in, and another dog in tow, their new neighbours started complaining. And in 2012, the Chawners landed up in court yet again.
My 2 daughters and me supposed to swear at her, and it supposed to have happened on a Wednesday, but the police did not come here till the Sunday, issuing £80 fine tickets each.
My dad weren't having it because it's all lies yet again.
Philip and his 2 daughters challenged the fines in court, but were given convictions for threatening behaviour against their neighbour.
And I thought to myself, oh my God, here we go again. Is there anywhere we can move and not have all this sort of chucked back in our faces again?
Wherever we go, there's always neighbours, nasty neighbours, picking on us.
We will find a house eventually. A big house. So a house will come up.
Branded the nightmares next door again, it's perhaps only going to be a matter of time before the Chawners will hit the road once more.
This is the type of place I wouldn't mind moving to, a nice 3-bedroom bungalow with a garden, garage and a driveway.
But who knows where they'll end up.
If you see a family that look like the Chawners coming down the street, looking at a house near you, phone the estate agent up and sell it as fast as you possibly can.
Next time, a nightmare building project next door.
The workmanship is absolutely horrendous.
He's threatened to blow our house up.
A fight over land.
I told them both to get off my property and stay off my property.
And a community under siege.
She's brought all this on this village. End of.
I've always said that I would spend time in prison.
It Takes a Thief to Catch a Thief continues its new series this Thursday on Channel 5 at 8. Thieves are the last of Patrick's problems next, though, as he's having a fracking nightmare in new The Mentalist.